Yes, it has started.
Okay, okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. Uh, so, hello. A very good morning and a warm welcome once again to one and all to this virtual platform of Google Meet. This is Abhishek Shamanto, Assistant Professor, the Department of English, Vijayagor Jyotish Rai College. And on behalf of the department, I welcome you all to the second day of our two-day web lecture series organized by our department in collaboration with Internal Quality Assurance Cell of our college. We all know that we are all grappling with a pandemic situation that is getting worse day by day, and our normal academic activities have been jeopardized. In such a situation, it becomes imperative for us to maintain and sustain a connection with the students and also with other members of the academia. So, this web lecture series provides a great opportunity for the students and also for us to listen to distinguished scholars and academicians. We had a wonderful session yesterday and looking forward to having another one today also. I must say, we regret the fact that our principal madam, Dr. Rajashree Niyogi, could not make it to this session as she is having some issues with her device and connectivity. But I must say that she is always there for us and encourages and supports all our academic ventures. Uh, Now, let me introduce to all of you the distinguished speaker of the day. Today, we have with us an eminent scholar and academician, Dr. Shubhajit Sengupta. Presently, he is the head of the Department of English and Cultural Studies in the University of Paduan. He is passionate about Shakespeare and European Renaissance, and his doctoral thesis was on Shakespeare, titled Genre and Meaning in Shakespeare's Histories. He has presented papers in various national and international conferences, and his articles have been published in leading national and international journals as well. He is a member of the Shakespeare Society of India and had earlier been a member of the British Shakespeare Association. His other interests include 18th century British literature and culture, adaptation studies, and postmodern literatures. Apart from all these, Dr. Sengupta has various other interests as well. He is passionate about poetry, he is a wonderful orator, he is a man of theater as well, with significant acting skills. Besides, he has an avid interest in sports also. He's a cricket buff, and he had been a sports journalist for a leading daily as well. He is also an extraordinary painter and a wildlife photographer as well. So today we are going to listen to a what we can say a myriad-minded man. So before I request Dr. Sengupta to start his lecture, I want our head of the department, Dr. Ranabir Lahiri, to say a few words. As I came to know that Dr. Ranabir Lahiri and Dr. Shubhajit Sengupta, they are quite familiar with each other. So now I request our head of the department, Dr. Ranabir Lahiri, to say a few words and welcome Dr. Shubhajit Sengupta. Sir, sir, please unmute yourself. Amita?
Do you get me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, fine.
Get you.
Welcome back to Shubhajit, Dr. Shubhajit Sengupta. For me, it's someone coming back home after a long, long sabbatical. I will not mention about his extra academic creative pursuits, as Abhishek has already mentioned them. I closely follow them, and they are just excellent, smashing, first rate, to say the least. Now let me come back. We are all keen to hear him talk in his unmistakably impassioned, intensely involved style of presentation. I believe the inherent drama, the intensely lived moments of anxiety, insecurity, envy, despair in Shakespeare's sonnets will come alive through his embodied talk, through his refined accents and dramatic voice modulation. His teaching, the way he connects with his students, has a huge load of physicality that instantly forms a certain tactual bonds with his listeners. I'm just waiting to be carried back as he begins to talk to those days, wonderful days, I should say, we spent together. For me, therefore, it is going to be both an academic and a nostalgic trip. So let the journey begin. Please, Shubhajit.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ranavidya. Thank you, Abhishek. And warm good afternoon to everyone who is listening. It's, as Ranavidya said, a homecoming of sorts for me because between February 1998 and February 1999, I taught as part-time lecturer in the Department of English, Vijayagarh Jyotish Rai College, and was made to feel at home every day that I stepped on the college premises. And I even went out on a departmental picnic with the Department of English. That was early in 1999. It was a wonderful time that I had there. And I'm sure Ranavidya also has, as he said, fond memories of the time that we spent together. Now, I'll make a presentation here. So I'd like to share the screen. Mr. Prosenjit Dash is presenting, so that has to be replaced by my own slides, which I'll show.
Okay.
Could the organizers see to that?
Prosenjit, could you please let Dr. Shubhajit Sengupta present his screen? Prosenjit, can you hear me? Prosenjit, can you hear me?
Yes.
Dr. Sengupta will be presenting, so
I'm stopping my presentation.
Okay. Please let him do that.
Thank you. Just let me know if my slides are visible. I'll put them on the screen in a moment.
Okay.
Is my voice absolutely clear? Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, it is absolutely clear.
All right, thank you. All right, so there you go. Can you see the screen? Not yet?
Not yet.
All right, I'll do it. Someone else is presenting, Disha Mondal.
Disha Mondal.
Who is Disha Mondal? Please stop presenting your screen. Please.
Disha Mondal, please stop presenting your screen.
Otherwise, I will have to remove from this meeting and you can rejoin later.
Prosenjit, please remove him from the meeting for the time being.
Okay, now it's fine. It's fine now.
Okay.
Can you see the screen now?
No, it's not visible.
Not yet.
Prosenjit, is it visible?
No,
it is not visible.
All right. Just a moment.
Okay, okay. You take your time. Again, Disha Mondal is presenting. Prosenjita, please remove Disha Mondal.
Yes, Disha Mondal is presenting still. So
Disha Mondal, you are requested to not present your screen repeatedly. Still you are presenting. This is disgusting.
Prosenjita, please remove Disha Mondal. Please remove Disha Mondal. Okay, thank you.
okay, now just tell me if it's visible. I'll put it back.
Okay, okay.
Is it there? Not yet.
No, not yet.
Just give me a moment.
Okay, okay. You take your time. Actually, this is the problem with our new normal.
Now, I think you'll be able to see it now. Just a moment.
Yes, yes, yes. Now it's getting.
It is getting visible.
Now? Can you see it?
Prosenjita, can you see it?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Okay, 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 okay.
Okay, can you see the title page?
Yes. You're reading Shakespeare sonnets. Yes, it's ready.
Okay. It is absolutely visible. Reading Shakespeare.
Now, is it full screen?
Yes, it is full screen.
All right, thank you. So let's get going.
Okay, thank you.
The title of the presentation then is Reading Shakespeare's Sonnets, and this presentation is aimed primarily at the undergraduate honors students, though I'll be trying to tell them something which may be new to them. I'm not sure if they've been told these things already in the classroom, but I'll try to say certain things in my own way. But I'll begin with a few preliminaries, such as the composition and the year of publication, the identities of W.H. and the young man, and the rival poet, and the dark lady. And then I'll get down to talking about the first 17 sonnets, which will lead us to sonnet 18, which is a sonnet I want to discuss in some detail. And then I'll go all the way to sonnet 127, which is the first in the series that we call the Dark Lady sonnets, and then move on to sonnet 130, which, as you all understand, is an extremely important sonnet in the sequence. So when we read Shakespeare's sonnets, the first thing that we need to do is look up a bit of the history of sonneteering during the Renaissance. Now, that's not the subject of today's discussion, but we'll just briefly take a look at Petrarch and Dante. Dante, of course, was the first to write sonnets in Renaissance Italy. He was followed by Petrarch, who was the leading figure among the sonneteers in Italy. And so the Petrarchan sonnet is also called the Italian sonnet. Petrarch lends his name, so to speak, to a kind of sonnet that was written in Italy. And his sonnets were all love poems. Dante's poems were all about love as well. Dante addressed a lady called Beatrice. Some of the sonnets were about Beatrice and some were directly addressed to Beatrice. The same was the case with Petrarch. Some of the sonnets were addressed to a lady called Laura, and some were written about Laura, but they were all love poems. Now, I'll briefly mention something that you probably know already, the structure of the Petrarchan or the Italian sonnet. Now, any poem that has 14 lines in it would not qualify as a sonnet. a sonnet has to have a certain structure, a certain rhyme scheme. And either it's the Italian rhyme scheme or the English rhyme scheme or variants, and there are quite a few variants of the Italian rhyme scheme and of the English rhyme scheme. The English rhyme scheme doesn't have too many variants. The Italian rhyme scheme has probably a few more variants than the English rhyme scheme. Now, the Italian rhyme scheme was A, B, B, A, which meant that the first line rhymed with the fourth, the second with the third in the first 4 lines, A, B, B, A. And then in the next 4 lines, the fifth line rhymed with the eighth and the sixth with the seventh. And so we had A, B, B, A, and again A, B, B, A. Now note, A is repeated in the first line. That's the last word, the last syllable of the first line, which rhymes with the last syllable of the fourth line and the last syllable of the fifth and the eighth lines as well. So A is repeated 4 times, and the Italian sonneteer, therefore, had to find 4 words which would rhyme in the A style. So A, B, B, A, B, B, A. 4 A's and also 4 B's. And the Italian sonneteer would have to find 4 other words which would rhyme as well. So he would have to find 2 sets of words which would rhyme, and 4 rhyming words in each set. The second line would rhyme with the third, the sixth, and the seventh. And the first would rhyme with the fourth and the fifth and the eighth. Now, that makes it a section of 8 lines. And these 8 lines would carry forward one single current or train of thought. And this set of 8 lines would be called the octave, O-C-T-A-V-E. Now, there have to be 6 more lines to make it 14, and this brings us to the second section of the typical Italian sonnet, and this is called the sestet, S-E-S-T-E-T. And how would the rhymes be in the sestet? CDC, CDC, which means that the 9th line, which is the first line of the sestet, would rhyme with the 11th and the 12th and the 14th. So the Italian sonneteer would have to find 4 more words which would rhyme together, 4 C's, just as he had to find 4 A's and 4 B's. And then he would have to find 2 other rhyming words, the 2 D's, the 10th line and the 13th line. C, D, C, 9, 10, 11. C, D, C, 12, 13, 14. Now, one very frequent variant of the rhyme scheme in the sestet would be CDE, CDE, which would mean that the Italian sonneteer would have to find 2 C's only and not 4, but along with the 2 C's and the 2 D's, he would also have to find 2 E's, 3 different kinds of words which would rhyme.
Abhishek, the speaker has got disconnected somehow.
Okay, I noticed it. He got disconnected somehow. Okay, let me check. The session was going on really well. So we lost the audio connection. Just let me check. Prasenjita, is our connection all right?
Yes, it's absolutely right.
Okay. So let me give him a call. Okay, please bear with us for a moment. We have lost connection with our speaker. We will get back very soon. I'm calling him but can't reach him. One of his numbers is switched off. I'm calling him on another number. Prashinta, can you see Dr. Sengupta? Prashinta?
Probably he got disconnected. I am not seeing him.
Okay. He's got totally disconnected. I cannot reach him either over phone. Let me check one. Actually, this is the problem with connectivity.
It was going smooth. No?
It was all going very well. Suddenly, what happened? something happened. I'm very sorry. I can't reach Dr. Shubhajit Sengupta. Both of his numbers are switched off. So somehow he got disconnected. I have texted him also. I have tried to call him on both his numbers, but still can't reach him. It's a pity that we were in the middle of a wonderful session, but suddenly uh, this thing happened. So please bear with us. We are trying uh, to contact our speaker, Dr. Sengupta. Sangeeta, uh, Sangeeta, please keep an eye on the list. I'm trying desperately to contact him, but
Yes,
I
yes.
think he switched off his phone because he is in the middle of a talk. So what could I do? I couldn't reach to him. Okay, let me try. Let me send him a mail so that we can see. Let me try. So please bear with us, dear participants. We are very sorry uh, that our speaker got disconnected.
He may not be aware that he has been disconnected.
That is the problem, and his both of his numbers are switched off.
That's why it is switched off.
Okay, so what to do?
Mail him.
Okay, okay, I'm
Mail
trying.
him. Probably we will see that.
I have sent him an email. So let us hope he sees that.
Let's see what happens.
Let's see. Otherwise, our connection is all right. All the participants are there.
It's absolutely fine today.
This is absolutely fine
There is
today.
no problem.
The session was really going on really well. What happened?
It may be due to power cut or something else. Who is Ritika Mahata? Please stop presenting the screen.
Ritika Mahata, please stop presenting your screen. That perhaps our speaker is not aware that he got disconnected. That is why this problem is happening. We can't
He may
reach
not be
him.
aware of that.
Okay, that is the problem. I think I can't reach him over phone.
Otherwise, you'd
You'd contact us.
open his phone. Yes.
I have already sent him an email. Okay. We got
Hello.
back.
Hello.
Shubhajit,
Abhishek, yes.
you got completely disconnected.
Now, how long ago was that? I didn't know that I was disconnected. How long ago?
It is almost 5 or 6 minutes back.
So I need to go over some of the things that I had said.
Okay. Because I tried everything. I texted you. I called you. Your phone was.
No, I have switched off my mobile because I was afraid that I would be receiving calls from elsewhere.
Okay. That is normal. But we completely lost you.
Yes.
Okay. Thank
So
you.
I'll begin the presentation again and maybe go over some of the things that I said in the last 4 minutes.
Okay. Thank you.
And let me know when the screen is visible.
Okay. You were talking about the rhyme scheme about Dante and Beatrice and all those things, about the rhyme scheme of the sonnets. Okay. You take your time. Good to have you back.
I'm trying to put the screen back.
Okay. Thank you.
Just a moment. Just a moment.
Shostika Das, please mute your video. I request all the participants to mute their microphone and video options, please.
There's some problem here. I'm trying to sort it out.
Okay.
Can you see the screen? Can you see the screen?
Okay, it is visible. It is
Yes.
visible. Okay.
All right.
Okay. Please carry on, please.
Thank you. Yes. Now, Shakespeare wrote, I don't know where exactly we lost connection, but this is where I'll begin. Shakespeare wrote 154 sonnets between 1592 and 1598. And in 1598, in 1598, now that should be 1598, Francis Mears. It cannot be 1998. 1998 was the year when I started teaching in Vijayanagar College. But this is to be 1598. 1598 was when Francis Mears published Palladius Tamia, which in its English translation would be Wit's Treasury. And there he referred to Shakespeare's sugared sonnets because the sonnets were so mellifluous. The witty soul of Ovid lives in mellifluous and honey-tongued Shakespeare. Witness his Venus and Adonis, his Lucrece, his sugared sonnets among his private friends. And in 1609, the sonnets were published, though they had been finished in 1598. Now, Thomas Torp was the gentleman who published them in a quarto format and probably without Shakespeare's permission. And of the 154 sonnets in the sequence, the first 126 either speak about or directly address a young man. Sonnet 127, which begins the next section of the sequence, which is popularly called the Dark Lady section. Sonnet 127, the first sonnet in that section of the sequence, is a poem of only 12 lines to serve probably as a visual indicator of that sonnet being the first of a new section in the sequence. And so these remaining sonnets, at least up to sonnet 152, either speak about or address a lady of dark complexion and metaphorically dark and dubious morals, popularly called Shakespeare's Dark Lady. However, perhaps not all the sonnets between 127 and 152 are about the Dark Lady. Sonnet 129, for example, appears to have been only suggested by the poet's relationship with her and is neither addressed to the Dark Lady, nor is it very explicitly about the Dark Lady. And Sonnet 146, for a change, seems to have nothing really to do with the relationship between the poet and the Dark Lady. Sonnets 153 and 154 are what you would call anacreontics. Anacreontics is a literary mode that deals with hedonistic desires. You know what hedonistic desires are, the students. Hedonism is a philosophy which advocates being merry, eat, drink, and make merry. That seems to be the motto of hedonism. And anacreontics is, or anacreontic in its singular form, is a literary mode that deals with hedonistic desires for love and for wine and for song, and is often associated with the theme of carpe diem, or catch the day, do it at the present moment without waiting. That's what carpe diem means. And this sort of poem, this sort of writing, it could be some other kind of writing besides a poem, is written in imitation of the Greek poet Anacreon, and so it's called anacreontic. Sonnets 153 and 154, which are anacreontics, are probably a homage to Edmund Spenser. Now, Spenser wrote Amoretti, which is a series of love poems, and it's not just a sequence of 89 sonnets, it has a three-part structure. It has a sequence of 89 sonnets, a series of short poems called anacreontics, and that's where Shakespeare got it from probably, and it also has the poem, the long poem, Epithalamion, which is a celebration of marriage in verse. And Shakespeare wrote in imitation of that structure. He wrote 154 sonnets, out of which sonnets 153 and 154 are anacreontics. And then we also have in the same book that was published in 1609 by Thomas Thorpe, a poem called A Lover's Complaint, which is a long narrative poem and was printed as part of the 1609 quarto of Shakespeare's sonnets. Now let's come to a few identities. W.H. Now the sonnets, if you see the title page of the book that was published in 1609, you'll find that the sonnet sequence is dedicated to what Shakespeare calls the only begetter of the ensuing poems, and that's a person called W.H. Now, who could this W.H. be? Several names have been proposed as contenders for W.H. It could be William Herbert, the Earl of Pembroke. It could be Henry Wriothesley, who was the Earl of Southampton, and both were very close to William Shakespeare, and Shakespeare could have been seeking their patronage, and to that end could have dedicated his sequence of sonnets to either of them. Henry Wriothesley could have had his initials reversed and turned into W.H. Or, as has been suggested rather ridiculously by some people, W.H. could mean William himself, and Shakespeare could have been addressing or dedicating his sequence of poems to his own self. But that's a rather absurd suggestion. Now, the young man of the first 126 sonnets may or may not be the same as W.H. And there is hardly any ground for the supposition that Mr. W.H., to whom the sequence of sonnets is dedicated, is the same person as the young man of the 126 sonnets at the beginning of the sequence. Now, the likely contenders for the Dark Lady, I'll just mention the names here without going into details. You could look up books to find out who they were and who were the critics who proposed their names. Emilia Lanier and Black Luce. Black Luce, of course, was a sort of nickname for this lady, and there was the wife of John Florio, and there was Mary Fitton, and there was Jacqueline Field, and there could be a few others as well who have been supposed to be Shakespeare's Dark Lady, but we're not sure. And this is a rather fruitless endeavor, because I don't think there's a way of reaching any sort of conclusion regarding the identities that I've spoken about, both of W.H. and of the Dark Lady, and also of the young man and the rival poet. Now, the identity of the rival poet of sonnets 79 and 86. In sonnet 87, the poet is lamenting that the young man is moving away from him, but is also saying rather cynically that he is not worthy of the young man, and the young man had indeed better remove himself from his company to greener pastures, so to speak, and move towards the rival poet. Now, this has been this debate about the identity of the rival poet, who figures between sonnets 79 and 86. This has been as much a subject of controversy as the identities of W.H. and the young man and the Dark Lady, and the names that have been suggested have been those of Spencer and Christopher Marlowe and Michael Drayton, Thomas Nash, Daniel and Chapman and Barnes, among others. Professor Minto suggested that it was Chapman, and Dowden and Furnivall agreed with him. And Chapman perhaps remains the most likely to have been the poet that Shakespeare had in mind when he talked about a rival poet. Now, we suppose that the sonnets at the start of the sequence, right up to sonnet 126, are either about the young man or they are addressed to the young man. Now, because we don't have really the time to go all the way into sonnet 70 and analyze it, I'll only just mention here briefly that sonnet 70 challenges such a theory. And this sonnet seems to be addressed to either the Dark Lady of the later sonnets or to some other person. It might be addressed to the young man, as some critics have supposed, in a desperate effort to defend the theory that all the first 126 sonnets are about the young man, or they address him. But then it seems extremely unlikely, if you care for the contents of sonnet 70 and the spirit in which the words are spoken. It seems extremely unlikely that sonnet 70 is either addressed to the young man or is about the young man. That thou art blamed shall not be thy defect, for slander's mark was ever yet the fair. Now, the fair, mind you, could be the young man, yes, indeed, because he's handsome, but fair is an adjective conventionally reserved for ladies, the fair sex. And when the poet says slander's mark was ever yet the fair, what he means is that it is generally women who are accused of all the wrong and immoral things that take place in the world of human beings. There's a passage in Cymbeline which begins with the line, it is a woman's part, where the speaker says that all the evil qualities in a person are derived from the mother, and all the positive and virtuous qualities from the father. So the fair here could be indeed a lady, it could indeed be the dark lady of the later sonnets, but that is all that I'll say for the time being on Sonnet 70. It's only to provoke you to have a closer look at Sonnet 70 and read it in the context of Sonnets 30 to 35 and place those earlier sonnets next to Sonnet 70 and try and figure out for yourselves who the person could be that the poet calls thou in the opening line, that thou art blamed, etc. All right, now before we move on to Sonnet 18, which I'll talk about, let's see what the early sonnets do. Now, sonnets 1 to 17 lead us up to Sonnet 18, and in these sonnets the poet is talking about procreation. The young man is very handsome, and the poet wouldn't like to lose him. The poet wouldn't like the world to lose the idea of beauty, the essence of beauty that the young friend bears. And he also knows at the same time, the poet knows, that the young man will die a physical death. He will grow old, he will lose the features of youthfulness that he now bears. He will turn into a wrinkled old man. And the onset of the signs of old age will set in by the time he steps into his 40th year, which is something he talks about at the start of the second sonnet in the sequence. But something has to be left behind for posterity, so that the essence of beauty that the young man carries is not entirely taken away from the world. And the young man's beauty has to survive beyond his imminent physical death. It needs to be perpetuated for posterity to relish. Now, in the first sonnet, he sets the tone for this line of argument, and he is suggesting between sonnets 1 and 17 that the young man should marry and beget children. Now, sometimes Shakespeare has been, or the poet, if we don't take the sequence to be autobiographical, the poet has been accused of a homosexual relationship with the young man. But then it's unlikely that a homosexual partner would ask the other partner to marry a woman and beget children. He would like to spend the rest of his life with his partner rather than ask that partner to marry a woman, which is what the speaker in these sonnets is doing, at least in the early part of the sequence. Now, I rest my case here, and I'll carry on with what the poet is saying. From fairest creatures we desire increase, that thereby beauty's rose might never die. We desire that all beautiful creatures in this world multiply and increase their numbers, so that beauty's rose, the essence of beauty, survives the onslaughts of time. But a person who is growing old should necessarily die, and he needs to have a child, a young child, an heir who would inherit his beauty and bear the memory of that beauty. But as the riper should by time decease, his tender heir might bear his memory. Now let's come down to Sonnet 2. And the poet says to the young man that when he turns 40 and has wrinkles on his brow, which would look like deep trenches dug in a battleground, the young man's beauty, which people gaze at so intently now, will be like a tattered weed, worthless. And then if he is asked where his beauty has disappeared, if he points into the deep sunken eyes, the sockets of his eyes, and replies that his beauty has sunk in there, that would be very, very shameful. So what he needs to do is marry and give birth to a child to whom he could point in his reply to such a question. And pointing towards that child, he could say, this child of mine has inherited my beauty by a certain law of succession. So as the couplet says, the beauty would be new made. It would be new made in the child when the young man turns old. And the young man would then see that beauty which he now bears transferred from himself to the young man. He would feel his blood cold in him, but it would be warm. He would see it running warm inside his son. When 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field, thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be a tattered weed of small worth held. Then being asked where all thy beauty lies, where all the treasure of thy lusty days, to say within thine own deep sunken eyes were an all-eating shame and thriftless praise. How much more praise deserved thy beauty's use, if thou couldst answer, this fair child of mine shall sum my count and make my old excuse, proving his beauty by succession thine. This were to be new made when thou art old, and see thy blood warm when thou feelst it cold. The third sonnet again asks the young man to marry. He asks the young man to look in a mirror and tell the face that he sees there, his own face, that it is now time that that face should form another, the face of his child. Look in thy glass and tell the face thou viewest, now is the time that face should form another. And then he talks of the young man's mother. And he, the young man, is his mother's mirror. And his mother, when he looks at him, calls back her own youthful days when her beauty was the talk of the town, so to speak, when she herself was very beautiful. Look at the third quatrain. Thou art thy mother's glass, and she in thee calls back the lovely April of her prime. So thou through windows of thine age shall see, despite of wrinkles, this thy golden time. When you have wrinkles on your forehead, you shall see your present golden time in your child, if you marry and have a child. But if you live single and do not wish to be remembered, then die unmarried, die single, and your beautiful image will die along with you. This is what the poet says in the couplet. Sonnet 12 repeats that same idea. In fact, all these sonnets do, leading up to sonnet 18. When I do count the clock that tells the time and see the brave day sunk in hideous night, when I behold the violet past prime, etc. He talks about how things change. And then look at the start of the third quatrain. When I see things changing with time, then of thy beauty do I question make, that thou among the wastes of time must go, since sweets and beauties do themselves forsake, and die as fast as they see others grow. And nothing against time's scythe can make defense, save breed to brave him when he takes thee hence. The only thing that can protect a person against time, who is imagined here as a reaper with a scythe, mowing down, cutting down blades of corn in a cornfield, the only thing that can protect a person from time's onslaught is procreation, breed, which will enable the person to challenge time when time would take the person away from the world, when he dies. So if he has a child, the child would retain the dead father's memory and all the good qualities of the dead father. Now, sonnet 16 is one where for the first time the poet makes a reference to his poetry, but no sooner has he done this than he dismisses the quality of his poetry as worthless and barren, and asks the young man to seek some other way, a mightier way than through his own poetry, the poet's poetry, to defeat time. But wherefore do not you a mightier way make war upon this bloody tyrant time, and fortify yourself in your decay with means more blessed than my barren rhyme? My rhyme is barren, it can't do anything worthwhile. Now you need to fortify yourself when you grow old, when your beauty decays. You need to protect yourself as people protect themselves inside forts. And that fort would be your child. My rhyme is barren, but not so the many women who are willing to marry you, the maidens that the poet refers to later in the poem. So wherefore do not you a mightier way through procreation defeat time? Now stand ye on the top of happy hours, and many maiden gardens yet unset with virtuous wish would bear your living flowers, much liker than your painted counterfeit. And the children which the woman you marry out of the several that are waiting to marry you, the children or the child that the woman would bear you would be closer to you in appearance than a painting of your face done by a painter. Now, Sonnet 17, however, is a development. And the poet now says that he will write poetry where he will try to talk about the young man's beauty. And through his poetry, he will try to eternalize the young man's beauty. But he wonders whether people will believe what he will be saying in his verse. He fears that people will be dismissing the poet's claims about the young man's beauty as the rantings and ravings and the lies of an old man. And so it's necessary that the young man should marry and have a child who will be there to vindicate whatever claims the poet would be making about the young man's beauty. So both are necessary. Procreation, which would result in the birth of a child who would bear the father's beauty, and the poems that the poet would write about the young man's beauty. Now, this poem is necessary if you are trying to understand the next poem, Sonnet 18. Who will believe my verse in time to come if it were filled with your most high deserts? Though yet heaven knows it is but as a tomb which hides your life and shows not half your parts. If I could write the beauty of your eyes, and in fresh numbers number all your graces, the age to come would say, this poet lies, such heavenly touches ne'er touched earthly faces. So should my papers, yellowed with their age, be scorned like old men of less truth than tongue, and your true rights be termed a poet's rage, and stretched meter of an antique song. But were some child of yours alive that time, you should live twice, in it and in my rhyme. Now this brings us to the next sonnet, which is important, one of the most famous that Shakespeare wrote. He begins by asking whether he should compare the young man's beauty to that of a summer's day, an English summer's day, which is very, very beautiful. Now by day, he probably doesn't mean a single day by count of daylight hours. It doesn't mean a span of 24 hours or even the hours of daylight in a single summer's day. What he means is the summer season, summer time, because later in the poem, he talks about the brevity of summer. And summer's lease hath all too short a date. If he were talking of a single summer's day or the hours of daylight, he wouldn't have been talking of it in terms of brevity, because the hours of daylight in a single summer's day are much longer than those in a winter's day, both in England and in most other parts of the world. So it's the season that he's talking about, because in England, summer is much shorter than winter, and people look forward to it, and it disappears very, very quickly. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? And no sooner has he raised this question than he dismisses the possibility of such a comparison on the ground that the young man is more temperate, more balanced, and more beautiful because of that balanced and temperate quality. And what are the disadvantages of a summer's day? There are occasional rough winds that spoil the beauty of the flowering buds. The darling buds of May are shaken from the branches. And summer's lease, this is an image from law. It is as if a certain part of the year has been lent out on lease to summer, but that lease is for a very short period. And once it expires, summer bids adieu. And sometimes in summer, the sun is excessively bright and hot, and sometimes the golden color of the sun is dimmed by dark clouds. And all the beautiful things of nature, from their state of beauty, decline inevitably. Now, the word fair is used thrice in the poem. The first time that it's used, and every fair from fair. Every fair means every beautiful thing. From fair. The second fair means from the state of beauty. And the third fair, which is used in the 10th line, means simply beauty. And every fair from fair, every beautiful thing from its condition of beauty, experiences a decline or a fall, either by accident, by chance, or because the laws of nature have to be followed, and the laws of nature imply that things must change. And if those laws are untrimmed or uninterrupted, the changes will take place. But the poet wishes to trim nature's changing course, to interrupt and make his own interventions into nature's natural laws. And how would he do that? He comes to that a little later, but first he says, but thy eternal summer, this metaphorical summer, your beauty shall not fade, unlike the literal summer in the real world. Nor shall you ever lose possession, once again an image from legal matters, of that fair. Here the third fair in line 10 simply means beauty. You shall always possess that beauty thou owest. Now, to owe someone money is to be in debt. You owe me 20 rupees means that you would have to pay me 20 rupees. But during Shakespeare's time, owe also had the other meaning, to own something, to be the owner of something. So you shall never lose that beauty which you own. Nor shall death, note the personification, brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines. Now for the first time the poet makes a mention of his poem. My lines shall eternalize you. Now this expression here, eternal lines, may be read as transferred epithet because he's talking of writing lines which would eternalize the young man. But the lines themselves would also need to be eternal. The poetry too would need to live on eternally if they were to eternalize the young man. And I'll come to that when I talk about the couplet. When in eternal lines to time thou growest. All right, so far so good. Now the couplet is not as simple as it seems to be. It seems to say that he seems to be clinching his earlier argument that his poetry will eternalize the young man's beauty. He says with seeming confidence, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this and this gives life to thee. He seems to have no doubt whatsoever about the power of his poetry to eternalize its subject, the young man. But I'll prefer a more complex reading of the couplet and focus on the anaphoric beginning, the two lines which begin with so long. And so long is an expression that cuts against the idea of eternity and seems to set a point of termination, a boundary beyond which one wouldn't go, so long as men can breathe. So the way the lines are spoken, and if the reader emphasizes so long in the way I'll do now, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So if I read it that way, I'm emphasizing the conditions that are being set by the poet. The young man shall be eternalized, well, or shall survive in the poet's poems, only so long as there are people on earth. Men can breathe, so long as they're alive. There is human life on earth. But that alone will not suffice. There may be human life on earth, but all people may turn blind, or they may not be willing to set their eyes on the pages in which the poet would have written about the young man. So there have to be eyes to see and read the poems. read the poems. This is the second necessary condition. And of course, the poems also need to survive. If human beings survive, and if they're willing to read what the poet has written, but if the poems are lost, then the young man is not successfully eternalized. So there are three conditions there: the survival of human life, the willingness to read, and the availability of the poet's poems. And if all these three conditions are satisfied, only then would the poet be able to successfully eternalize the young man in his poetry. Now, this sort of couplet is characteristic of Shakespeare, and most of the sonnets in the sequence have couplets which can be read in two different ways. Read in one particular way, they seem to be affirming the contentions and arguments of the preceding 12 lines, but read slightly differently, they seem to be denying, to a certain extent, the arguments of the preceding lines. Now, let's move on to, in Sonnet 19, the next sonnet in the sequence. Now, we need to set Sonnet 18 in its context. In the next sonnet in the sequence, the poet is saying much the same thing. He's challenging time, devouring time, blunt thou the lion's paws, and make the earth devour her own sweet brood. Do anything you want. And towards the end, he says, yet do thy worst, old time, despite thy wrong. My love shall in my verse ever live young. So now he begins to have an increased confidence in the power of his poetry. Now, this again is problematized in some of the later poems in the sequence, where the poet talks about his verse eternalizing the young man. In one of the sonnets later in the sequence, the poet says that his love shall shine bright in black ink, referring to the ink in which he'll write. But he's also, in mentioning black ink, looking forward, isn't he, to the dark lady and to a certain kind of metaphorical blackness or evil, which we could have discussed at some other point of time, not today, sorry. Now, Sonnet 127 is a sonnet which sets the tone for the dark lady section of the sonnets, because here the poet is talking about blackness, and he's saying that at one point of time in the past, black was thought of as ugly, as synonymous with ugly. It was not considered fair. It was not something that bore the name of beauty, but now black seems to be beauty's heir. Black is considered beautiful. In the old age, black was not counted fair, or if it were, it bore not beauty's name. But now is black beauty's successive heir, and beauty slandered with a bastard shame. So this sets the tone, doesn't it, for the poet's celebration of darkness and blackness and the kind of engagement that he seems to have with the dark lady. But the poem that we'll talk about now, 130, which is the most famous of the poems in the dark lady section, is a poem which reverses Petrarchan conventions in a very important way. I told you at the start of the lecture that Petrarch and sonneteers who wrote in Petrarch's manner would often form a catalogue of the lady's beautiful features. And what the poet is doing here in Sonnet 130 is a reversal of that convention. He is talking about the lady's features, the dark lady's features. He too is offering a catalogue of the dark lady's features, but he is offering us a catalogue not of extraordinary and exquisite features, as the Petrarchan sonneteers were wont to do, but he is offering us a list of very ordinary features. My mistress' eyes, so that this lady, the mistress, seems to be a girl next door and not the exquisite, Laura-like, semi-divine young lady of the Petrarchan sonnet. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damasked, red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes is there more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. And yet, by heaven, I think my love as rare as any she, belied with false compare. An interesting poem. Now, the poet is not saying the lady is ugly. What he is suggesting is that the lady is ordinary and very human. And so indeed are all those ladies in reality that the Petrarchan sonneteers talk about. But what those Petrarchan sonneteers do, the poet seems to be saying here, is that they lie about the ladies by falsely comparing different features of the ladies that they write about with certain other objects in the natural world, like waves of the sea and corals and things of that sort, or snow. And the comparisons are done in a manner which make it appear as if indeed the lady's eyes are as bright as the sun, and coral is something that her red lips may be compared to, when in actuality, no lady's lips can be as red as coral, or eyes can be as bright as the sun. Now, the speaker who is saying this in Sonnet 130 is not William Shakespeare, probably. So, as I said at the start, we shouldn't really be considering the sonnets to be autobiographical unless there is conclusive evidence. In Romeo and Juliet, Romeo talks about Juliet's eyes and compares them to the brightness of the stars in the heavens, and says that they're brighter than the stars. In that famous balcony scene, he has jumped over the wall into the Capulet orchard, and Juliet appears on a balcony above, and Romeo, who is hiding behind a bush, is mesmerized by the brightness of her eyes, and wonders if two stars had left on some imaginary business, asking her eyes to twinkle in their places till the time they returned, the heavens would be so brightened that the birds would sing their morning songs, thinking that dawn had broken. And Romeo says, two of the fairest stars in all the heaven, having some business, do entreat her eyes to twinkle in their spheres till they return. Oh, that her eyes were there, they in her head. The brightness of her cheeks would shame those stars as daylight doth a lamp. Her eyes in heaven would through the airy region seem so bright that birds would sing and think it were not night. So elsewhere, Shakespeare has indeed made a character echo the Petrarchan convention. And this is something very common in literature. Pope does this when he talks about Belinda in The Rape of the Lock, comparing Belinda's eyes to the sun. But here, what Shakespeare is doing is something very unconventional, as you understand. But one important point to make here is that poets idealize. And it is because poets idealize and turn the brazen world into a golden one, as Sidney supposed, it is because they do that, they write about things in a way that make things appear more beautiful than they would be in the real world. And there's nothing really wrong in that. And to speak of that as an utterance of lies, as our poet does here in the last line, is to misunderstand the very purpose of poetry. Now, Shakespeare himself, being a poet, wouldn't really have misunderstood the purpose of poetry to such an extent as to suggest that the other ladies in the Petrarchan sonnets had been spoken about in a way which would suggest that those poets were liars. Well, if poets are indeed liars, it's quite a legitimate exercise in lying, because the very purpose of poetry is to idealize, and it's difficult to idealize a very ordinary thing in writing, in poetry, without adding to it some element of beauty, the secondary imagination, as Coleridge would have said, or as has been said of romantic poetry in general. Romantic poetry is the addition of strangeness to beauty. So something has to be added to the way things are in the real world. Now, Shakespeare was too much of a poet to disagree with that. And so when he makes the speaker in Sonnet 130 imply that those other poets have been lying about their ladies through false comparisons. I personally, and I believe several others, would probably be led to further assurance about the impossibility, and that's a strong word to use, but I will still use it, the impossibility of the sonnets being autobiographical. The speaker, for example, here in Sonnet 130 believes that those other poets were doing something wrong. And so he's trying to set things right by speaking about his lady as she is, by not idealizing the lady. But this refusal to idealize the lady cuts against the grain of the very intentions of poetry. And Shakespeare, left to his own, would rather be inclined towards those, he would be inclined more towards those purposes and objectives of poetry than towards the attitude of the speaker in Sonnet 130. Now, I think that's all that we have time for in today's discussion. Thank you for being attentive listeners. I think I've overstepped my limit a little. I apologize for that. But that's all that I think I'll be limiting my discussion to. Thank you, Abhishek, and thank you, Ronabida, and everyone associated with Vijayanagar Jyotish Rai College for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you will be a very small word to describe such a wonderful presentation that we had just listened. It was truly poetic. It was dramatic. I think the whole audience was under a spell, I think. So to listen to your rendition, your reading out of the sonnets, your contextualizing the sonnets, and all those things. So I think the participants had just forgot to put the questions. They're so much spellbound by your words, so to say. So now I request one of our faculty members, Shomoita, to please take the questions in the chat box.
Sir, we do have two questions.
All right.
After such a wonderful and engaging, presentation. The first question is from yes, sir. The first question is from Suchetana Pal. She is asking that could you please briefly mention the thematic shift that took place from Petrarchan sonnets to the English sonnets via Earl of Surrey, Wyatt, and Shakespeare's predecessor?
So could you please repeat the final section of that question?
Yeah, the thematic shift that took place from Petrarchan sonnets to the English sonnets via Earl of Surrey, Wyatt, and Shakespeare's predecessors.
All right, so now the Earl of Surrey, Henry Howard, and Thomas Wyatt, they were writing more or less in the manner of Petrarch. But they wrote in a very wooden style. They didn't have the mellifluous quality of Petrarch's verse. That, of course, is something different. So far as the theme is concerned, the way they wrote about the ladies was not too different from the way Petrarch had written or his followers had written. Now, the change came much later. It came with Shakespeare, I believe, and Shakespeare paved the way for someone like John Donne. Now, Shakespeare places himself and the young man on the same pedestal. He doesn't worship the young man, as the Petrarchan sonneteers had worshipped the lady, whom they had apparently placed on an imaginary pedestal, as one would a goddess. And as I said earlier, these Petrarchan sonneteers would subject themselves to the whims and fancies of the ladies. Shakespeare didn't do that, but some of the earliest sonneteers did. Look at Sidney. Sidney's sonnets are more or less autobiographical, unlike Shakespeare's. The same could probably be said for Spenser too, and his love for Elizabeth Boyle. And Sidney, of course, as we know, was passionate about Penelope Devereux. The two never married, though Penelope was divorced from the man he married, the Earl of Essex, Lord Rich. But even then, she didn't marry Philip Sidney. And there's something autobiographical there. So now Spencer, of course, was not writing about unrequited love. So there's a shift taking place from Spencer onwards. But if you read Sidney and most of the other English sonneteers who were the forerunners or the predecessors of the Shakespearean sonnet, writing before Shakespeare. By Shakespearean here, I mean Shakespeare's sonnets, not the style, which of course was established, as I said, by Henry Howard himself. Now, Shakespeare's predecessors were more or less following the thematic conventions of Petrarch. Sidney did that. He was probably the closest to Shakespeare in terms of time, in terms of chronology, to have done that. And the shift began taking place with Spencer. And then when we come to Shakespeare, the major thematic change in Shakespeare, of course, is that in the major portion of the sequence, in the bulk of the bulk of the poems in the sequence are about a man and not about a woman. This is something extremely unconventional. If you look at the kind of sonnets that were written by his contemporaries and predecessors, you will realize how radical this was. And secondly, when he's addressing this man or speaking about him, and also when he's speaking about or addressing the lady, he is placing the young man and the lady on the same plane as he himself, on the same footing, and not raising them to an imaginary pedestal and considering them to be superior to him. He's not doing that. He's often arguing with them. There are separations and misunderstandings, estrangements and reconciliations. There's a rival poet, as I said, and the poet fears that the young man might go away. Indeed, at one point in Sonnet 87, he lets him go. And so these are things that keep happening. And I would say that Shakespeare is a great poet. There are reasons for that. Of course, we all know some of those reasons. But when we're talking about the sonnets, I would say that he is great because these sonnets, much like our own Rabindra Shangi, they capture the nuances and the subtleties of all shades of human experience, all shades of human relationships. Unlike the Petrarchan style or the Petrarchan thematic convention, where we generally have a binary relationship of unrequited lover and exquisite but cold-hearted lady. Here we have relationships in all their varied forms and in all their complexities, which makes Shakespeare's sonnets very living in a certain sense, very alive for us. And that's certainly not the last reason for our enjoyment of Shakespeare's sonnets. Come to the next.
True, sir. Yes, sir. The next question is, it is from Mukti Prakash Roy, and he's asking, can it not be said that the poet's treatment of his beloved in Sonnet 130 represents a cultural ramification of Protestant iconoclasm and reaction against the cult of the Virgin?
Well, I didn't go as far as that because I was addressing mainly the undergraduate honors students. I think there is some basis. I think there is some basis in that line of argument. But I'll, in spite of there being some basis in that line of argument, I'll really not go into that because I don't think, honestly, that Shakespeare would have had all that in mind when he wrote the sonnets. And I always love keeping things simple. And even though we need to interpret texts variously, there are sometimes occasions when we overdo things. But of course, yes, it's true that we need to occasionally glance, if we are reading Sonnet 130 at the cult of the Virgin and about Protestant poetics and things of that sort. But I'll choose not to talk about it here because most of the members in the audience wouldn't understand it. And neither have I, honestly, I confess, given much thought to that line of thinking. What interests me and fascinates me about Sonnet 130 is what I told listeners today towards the end of my presentation. And that is, I think, a point that has hardly ever been touched upon. This difference here between the speaker in Sonnet 130 and the poet William Shakespeare. The speaker thinks that other poets have been liars and have been doing something dishonest, and he sets to make amends for that and he tries to set things right. Shakespeare the real poet in real life would have known that what the other poets were doing was not something immoral or bad, and there was no need really to set that thing right. When he wrote Sonnet 130, he was only making an experiment with a different way of approaching the lady, and with a different way of talking about the lady. So that's, I think, a very delicate and subtle point which we need to delve further into and elaborate upon before we talk about other things. But Mukti Prakash, thank you for that question. As I said, haven't really given it much thought, and so honestly, I'm not in a position to give you a very confident answer to that. But thank you for the question. I'll think over it, and I'll be very happy if maybe a couple of weeks from now you call me and seek my ideas on that.
Thank you very much, sir.
Sir, there is one more question from our student, Orijit.
Yes.
And that is, why did Shakespeare choose to present both the fair youth and the dark lady in his sonnet 144?
Now, there are some
yes.
I also spoke about sonnet 70, didn't I? Now, to say that the first 126 sonnets talk about the young man or engage with the young man, and the next few sonnets in the sequence are about the dark lady, is a simplification. There are certain sonnets, sonnet 70 is one of them, sonnet 144 is another, where things are a little complicated. And as in sonnet 70, we cannot really be sure who is being addressed. It's left ambiguous. Now, I would put my foot down firmly and say it's the dark lady. And that would cut against the argument that the first 126 sonnets are all about the young man. Now, I don't know why sonnet 144 should be both about the dark lady and the young man. Shakespeare would have known better. I really can't get into his mind now. He's been dead over 400 years. But of course, this is part of the complexity of the whole sequence. And the young man doesn't disappear. He doesn't die, does he? He doesn't go out of the poet's mind either. Once the poet has written sonnet 126, he stays on, and there is no reason why he couldn't be brought back. And in bringing him back, Shakespeare also talks about his two loves, doesn't he? He says, two loves I have, referring to the young man and to the dark lady. And now in bringing the young man back, he's trying to focus on and emphasize the complexity of a triangular relationship between himself and the dark lady and the young man. And he's also suggesting a relationship between the young man and the dark lady, which is a relationship which is an angle to this relationship that would have been lost if the two of them were not brought together in sonnet 144. So the whole purpose, the whole objective seems to be, mind you, seems is an important word, because as I said, we have no way of knowing what was in Shakespeare's mind. We have only the texts he has left us. And the objective seems to me to be to complicate the relationship, Now, a right approach to the sequence would be to reject anything that is simplistic. When we say that the sonnets are autobiographical, when we say that the first 26 sonnets are about the young man and the rest about the dark lady, we ignore this sort of complexity. We ignore the fact that in writing the kind of sonnets that he wrote in sonnets 153 and 154, Shakespeare was trying to imitate, up to a point, Edmund Spenser. So these are complexities, these are nuances that I think need to be brought into our analysis and critical interpretation of Shakespeare's sonnets. And thank you for that question.
So there's one more. He's really curious to know how you feel or what you feel about this fact that sonnet 144 mirrors Shakespeare's homosexual propensity and misogynistic attitude. What opinion do you have to share about this?
See, Shakespeare was first and foremost a poet. He was an artist. If we say that Shakespeare was a misogynist, if we say that Shakespeare was a homosexual, we would be saying that the sonnets are autobiographical, when there is no conclusive proof to tell us that the sonnets are autobiographical. In Hamlet, Hamlet says, frailty, thy name is woman, implying that all women are frail and they're not constant in their love and devotion. I referred to that speech from Cymbeline, where the speaker says that all that is evil in a person is because of the mother, and all that is good is because of the father. All right? Now, we cannot suppose that Shakespeare was a misogynist, because he was an artist. He was a person who wrote plays. And what is drama? Drama is a person where we have speakers, we have speech prefixes on a page in an edition of a play. These speech prefixes are the names of the characters on the margin on the left, alongside which you have their speeches. Macbeth, and then Macbeth's speech, and then Banquo and Banquo's speech. These are the speech prefixes. And the speech prefixes imply that it's the characters who are speaking. It's not Shakespeare. In the sonnets, we don't have speech prefixes, but for our general understanding of the sonnets, I would say that we need to have an imaginary speech prefix somewhere in our minds, and that would tell us that the speaker is a poet, a lover, or a poet figure, not William Shakespeare. There are so many poems written in the first person. It's only in a few of these poems, particularly in the romantic poems, that we suppose that the speakers are the poets in real life. But if you read, for example, Wilfred Owen's Strange Meeting, Wilfred Owen himself was a war poet, so also is the speaker in the poem. But the speaker in the poem is not Wilfred Owen. Wilfred Owen in real life didn't have the kind of experience that the speaker has in Strange Meeting. And so, just as we, in the case of a third-person narrative in fiction, make a distinction between, even in a first-person narrative, unless it's an autobiography, we make a distinction between author and narrator. Here also we need to make a distinction between speaker and poet, the real poet and the speaker in the poems. Now, we talk about Browning's dramatic monologues. Why are they dramatic? Not because there is some degree of action and movement. That's one reason. The more important reason is because the speaker in the poems is not the poet. And the dramatic monologue was a conscious, deliberate ploy, strategy to move away from the kind of confessional poetry that the Romantic poets wrote. So Shakespeare's sonnets also, in a way, are close to the dramatic monologues that were written by people like Browning. Though they are not really dramatic monologues because they don't have the full repertoire of qualities that a dramatic monologue has. But yes, I would caution you against identifying Shakespeare and Shakespeare's philosophy and Shakespeare's beliefs with those of the speaker in the sonnets. Okay.
Sir, more questions are coming in. There is another question by Dipanita Roy Chaudhary, a student. She's asking that in sonnet 130, the poet says, "And yet by heaven I think my love as rare." So if he is just trying to break the conventional norms of Petrarchan sonnets, why does he claim that his love is rare? And is it possible that while criticizing his predecessors, Shakespeare has somehow tried to present himself great because he can love a dark lady? Or is he really celebrating the beauty of the dark lady?
Just a moment. All right. No, he is celebrating the dark lady, not the dark lady's beauty, but he is celebrating the poet, not Shakespeare, mind you, the poet, the speaker in the poem. He is celebrating his relationship with the dark lady. He is not celebrating the beauty of the dark lady, because the dark lady doesn't seem to really have a beauty that would call for much celebration. She is not a Laura or a Beatrice, all right? Not even the young man of the preceding sonnets in the same sequence. The young man was very handsome. So it's the relationship that is being celebrated. And I don't think Shakespeare is trying to project himself as great by going out of the way to do this, because Shakespeare was great anyway, and he didn't really need to have a dark lady to have a relationship with in order to lay stakes to greatness. But so far as the first part of the question is concerned, I think that's interesting. It's a good question. I think my love as read. Love is not the love that he feels for the lady. Love here means the lady. She is my love. All right. So the love, it's not his emotion of love. No, it's the lady as rare. Now he says this because this rarity is not on account of any exquisite beauty. It's not on account of any exquisite beauty. This rarity is on account of the lady's uniqueness. Every individual is unique. I am different from anyone else, and so are other people. Each person in this world is different from any other person. So it doesn't need gainsaying, does it? It doesn't require the poet to say this, but he's emphasizing the point that a person's uniqueness, a person's individuality, although it's something that we take for granted, is often unnecessarily emphasized in poetry. Now, the purpose of a poet is sometimes to do this, but our speaker here, not William Shakespeare, our speaker here fails to understand that. He fails to understand so many important things about poetry. And that's, I think, one of the essential things to realize as we read Sonnet 130. The speaker's failure to come to terms with and understand the objectives and the purposes of poetry and the modes of utterance in poetry. So I think my love as rare is something that doesn't need to be said in ordinary life, but poets can be excused for saying that. And this poet here is saying that, why should I say that? My love is rare. Other poets have said that. And why should they have said that? Well, they said it because their ladies were beautiful. And if I am to say that as well, I would say this, but the reason would not be the lady's beauty. It would only be because she is an individual. But if being an individual is a reason for the poet to say that she is rare, it's again something that doesn't really need to be said, because it's something we know, it's something that we take for granted. It's again something very nuanced, very subtle, and a critic could make much of it in a response to Sonnet 130. And yet I think my love, as rare as any she, as any other woman, any she, belied with false compare, as in those other sonnets. So that, I think, is the reason why the poet says that the lady is rare. Of course, another possible meaning could be that in spite of the lady's ordinariness, the poet loves her. And to him, this lady is as dear and as precious as all the other ladies, the Lauras and the Beatrices, were to other more conventional sonneteers of the past. And things which are rare are always precious. That could be the secondary meaning. But I would give primacy to my first interpretation. All right.
So all that matters is that individuality and the uniqueness as
I would think so. It's a very delicate point. It's a very delicate point, and it needs to be more elaborately laid out and explained. I've only offered hints which could be built upon, which someone else could build upon.
For Boishakhi Roy, yes. She's asking, there has been much debate regarding the poet's sexual identity since Victorian age. Samuel Butler, for instance, debate born out of his sonnets more than anything else. What is your take on this? And also, she asks that we cannot deny that.
Sorry, just what's meant by the sexual identity of the poet?
Yes, there has been much debate regarding the poet's sexual identity since the Victorian age, and she mentioned Samuel Butler, and then she's saying that the debate is mainly born out of his sonnets more than anything else. Also, she has a question that we cannot deny that autobiographical elements are there in sonnets. So, what is your take in this?
So far as the poet's sexual identity is concerned, I don't think there's a question. He's a man. Now, so far as the poet's sexual orientation is concerned, was he a homosexual or was he a bisexual? Of course, as I said, a homosexual man, a gay man, would always want his male partner to remain with him and wouldn't urge the male partner to marry a woman and have children. Because if that happens, the man, after his marriage, would be living with his own family, not with the person, unless, of course, he wants to have some sort of double standards. Bertrand Russell, of course, said that we are committed to double standards, but that's different. I'm not sure. I mean, these are speculations. These are speculations. There are poems in the sequence where the poet is referring implicitly, sometimes in the form of innuendos. There are sexual puns and sexual innuendos. There are references to the male sexual organs. Sometimes these can make the reader uncomfortable. So these are things that have possibly led to speculations that the speaker in these sonnets, the male poet, must have had some fascination for the male sex. But then a homosexual wouldn't have been fascinated by a lady in the way that the poet is by the dark lady. He also loves the dark lady. He talks of his two loves. And remember, the word lover during Shakespeare's time did not always mean a person of the opposite sex. Neither did it mean, if a man were referring to another man as lover, that the man was gay or a homosexual. Lover had the alternative meaning of friend. Take, for example, Julius Caesar, where Brutus, addressing the Roman mob in the marketplace, begins his speech with the words, Romans, countrymen, and lovers. By lover, he means friends. He's addressing the Roman mob as lovers. And there are several other instances from early modern texts, from Renaissance texts, where the word lover has been used in this sense. The two loves I have, there are two people I love. One is a friend of mine, a man, and the other this lady to whom I have a more sexual, towards whom my approach, my love, it is more quote-unquote sexual. But the sexual puns and the allusions to male sexual organs possibly enhance the possibility of kind of interest in the male bodies. And that could be a suggestive of a homosexual orientation. He could be bisexual, yes. He could be bisexual. He could be capable of loving both men and women sexually. That's true, but that's speculation. I mean, why should we need to go into all that? Now, one of the points that I like to make about literature is that too much of glossing, too much of annotation takes the feel of literature away. The other day in another webinar, I was talking of Macbeth, and I was speaking about that soliloquy in Macbeth, which begins with, if it were done, when 'tis done. And I referred to a critic, James Shapiro, who has recently written a book called The Year of Lear, which is about 1606, because that was the year in which Shakespeare wrote King Lear and also Macbeth. And he says, James Shapiro, that the closing lines of that soliloquy suffer profoundly from glossing, from interpretation, from annotations. And pity like a naked newborn babe striding the blast, or heaven's cherubim horsed upon the sightless couriers of the air, shall blow the horrid deed in every eye, that tears shall drown the wind. Now, if you try to, or if the audience watching a live performance tries to understand these words, the meanings are very complex. Here we have a network of images. The audience wouldn't realize anything, understand anything, because they don't have the time to really ponder over individual images. And if they try to do that, they wouldn't get the feel of the lines. It's more important there to feel what Macbeth is feeling than to understand the meanings of words and images. And that, I think, should be, now, of course, if you're answering questions and examinations, you can't afford to have that kind of approach all the time. but there needs to be a balance. Interpretation can sometimes go overboard. Speculations can sometimes go overboard. And in any case, I think that speculations need to be sacrificed at the altar of documentation and evidence. All right.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sushma, for such a wonderful
It's been a pleasure.
handling of the questions. And I also really feel that too much of speculation mars the enjoyment of literature. At least that is what I get, that is you are trying to say at last.
Yes.
So now, and I want to quote Wordsworth. I can say that I want this will be ringing in our ears long after it was heard no more. So I want that feeling of your words to ring in our ears. So that is what I will remember of this session. So now I request Shomoita to please formally give the vote of thanks as we are nearing the end of our session. Shomoita, please. Shomoita, can you hear me? Shomoita? Shomoita, please unmute yourself. Shomoita, you have somehow, she had got disconnected. So I am taking the onus of giving the vote of thanks. And first of all, from the bottom of my heart, I sincerely thank you, your wonderful rendition, the way you have created a spell on all us, on all the participants. And we are really thrilled to hear from you. And I also want to participants, the questions, those who have put questions, and also to the members of our department, the faculty members, and obviously to our head of the department, Dr. Ranabil Lahiri. And obviously, I must mention the IQAC team and this kind of thing, who are taking care of all the technical aspects of this of the session. And I must thank Dr. Poshenjit Das, Dr. Shilajit Borua, and all the members of the IQAC team for making us feel at home. We are not that conversant with this kind of technology, so thank you very much, our IQAC Jyotish College, for helping us out in putting us this kind of a session. So on behalf of everyone, thank you very much again, and we look to have you in our college physically as we I think we will get back to our old normal ways in a few months, and we sincerely want you to have you in our college physically. So
yes, I'd
until
love to go there.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so until then, this is we are concluding the session, and until we get back to our old normal ways, stay home, everyone, and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.